This is my Skyline R33 GTR Series 3 V-Spec. Now I've had this car over at C-Red Tuning and a lot of the work done was of a poor standard. What we're looking at here is plenum and fuel rail as it's mounted on a factory RB26 setup. Now I had a Hypertune manifold bolted to this. Now what happens if you damage anything on here, the motor has to come out, because to take that setup out there's certain bolts you can't get to, so the motor has to come out to get that manifold and setup out if you're running a Hypertune manifold. Now I delivered the setup all complete. Motor was in the car with this rail on there, with everything on there, and all they had to do was remove the rear bolt of the rail, put that earth strap, that blue one, on and tighten it. Now that turned into a disaster when they broke this fuel rail mount and they continued to run the car on the dyno. What happened when it was running on the dyno? Fuel rail was already broken, so it lifted off and it sprayed fuel everywhere across the engine bay. So the previous video was one with the engine in, where we mocked everything up to see what was the cause of that problem. We'll have a look at the invoice first. Let's have a look here what we have. Okay, all the work I had done at the same time. Alright, so pretty much I did a few things to the ECU just to remove a V-cam, because we just had a solid cam put in. A few issues with misfiring that they could not fix. Let's see, refit coil's not tested, so they were going to test them after they did some modifications to it. As fuel rail mount failed. How on earth does that happen? What, does the fuel rail just come off? Does it just explode? So what actually happened is, while this work was being done, while they were fitting that earth strap that I showed previously, so this setup was actually delivered. This is the hardware you get from Plenum. It's a 40mm long bolt. As you can see, the reason it's 40mm long is you've got that dowel, and it should not go any further than that, because that is a blind hole. So if you put a longer bolt there and keep tightening it, either the fuel rail has got to sit loose, or if you keep forcing it, you've got to break something. This is how it was returned to me. So immediately I noticed they had put a bolt from a parts bin in there. And you can also see, if you remove this bolt, they've had to cut it down as well. So who knows how long it would have been before they even fitted it. Okay, so this one is all nipped up here. There is no give there. And here is obviously what they broke, or what allegedly failed. So I like to make fair assessments, so that's why we have everything out here. And if you can see there, we zoom in, that's protruding through. But we want to see if we can tighten this fully as it was with all our washers and it not foul on there. So we'll just loosen it a little bit. So it would have been like that before they tightened it. Now prior to this mount failing, as they called it, it would have been like that. As you can see, that's how it matches up, obviously without that fracture there. As we can see, you can see that fracture right along there. That's how it would have been. Would have sat something exactly like that. As we can see here, there's a little bit of protrusion, but it's not touching. It's very close. Let's go there. As you can see, the spring washers haven't compressed. This one's all tight. As you can see, it's a bit hard to see with a shadow. Let's focus. There's no protrusion there. You can pretty much stick a screwdriver right in there. So what we'll do, we'll begin tightening this one, and if it bottoms out before this can take up all the slack, that means that they broke that fuel rail mount. While I was having all this work here done, I got a call from Mark Palmer. And Mark, on the phone, he says, "Boris, one of your threads is stuffed. The bolt is going in extremely tight, or pretty much to that effect. It's threaded." Okay, we'll continue work. You guys worked on these cars for something like 20 years, so you know what you're doing. So the issue was, in real time when they were doing it, when they put that wrong bolt in, they would have began tightening it like that. Let's have a look. Just holding the phone with one hand, working with the other. We'll put the phone down while we tighten that. As we can see, the spring washer has not begun to compress, and pretty much that's just begun to touch. And that's slightly bulging, so if we try to push it in, we can't get it to sit in anymore. As you tighten it, it's beginning to spin because it's broken. Put the phone down again. Just tightened it a little bit, just a tiny bit of force with that small ratchet. And now that crack has become more pronounced, and that's touching even more. Mind you, they tightened it so hard that this bolt actually began tapping its own thread into this coolant pipe here. So pretty much it's all nipped up now, and if you tighten it just a tiny bit more, whatever force they had to use until they realized it was tight. So pretty much this began acting as a puller and pulled that fuel rail mount right off. It would have been something like that when it pulled off and it just decided to nip up, and it took up all the slack on the spanner. When you're doing it, you can't feel any more pressure. That's already loose, so it'll be fine for a few runs on the dyno. Then once you get the boost up, more fuel pressure and whatnot, it's just enough to sort of give it enough pressure just to sort of make that lift off. So there we are. So this pretty much lifted off like that, and injectors came out, sprayed fuel everywhere, full noise or whatever on the dyno. These are no longer cheap cars, so workmanship like this definitely has the potential to set somebody's car on fire. So that's it. Let's go for it again. Fuel rail mount failed. Look at that. Yep, it's just some of these things that I saw on these invoices, they just began to sound more and more incongruent. When you saw that, it's pretty much, it's a no-brainer. There you go, right from a parts bin. I have a picture before drop off with a correct bolt fitted. And let's go into the car. As I would receive the car back, it's still there, exactly where they left it. There we go. Proper hardware from Plasmaman. Nah, not needed. We'll just use our own crap out of a parts bin, cut it down, put it in, write you up your invoice, says your invoice, off you go. Just undo that. Take this one off. Alright, here we are, look at that. That's almost, I've cleaned it off, but we will see in one of the pictures, the receiver car, there was fresh shiny swarf here, which obviously came from that. As you can see, look at that, it's made a crater in there. Mark even goes to the extent of saying, yeah, it's been bottoming out before. Oh, there we go. We'll take this bolt out. What we'll do now that we have it out, let's actually tighten that until it nips up and see how much protrusion there is. Alright, that's compressed. Just with gentle force, enough until everything compresses. And as we can see, that is hanging out by a fair bit there. There we go. So that's definitely enough. This sits right up against it. It's a blind hole, so all you need is just a millimetre or two of protrusion, and that goes out. So normally when you notice something is going in tight, when you do your mechanics apprenticeship, you learn these sorts of things. You're being paid to learn. You don't learn on customers' cars and then charge them for it. So that's it right there. Now, the sort of question that begs, if they're cutting corners with things like that, rushing things, where else are they being careless and cutting corners? I've gone through the whole car. Some things are done good, some things aren't, but with some other things I saw, it was just decided to rip out all their work and restart. It's just not worth the risk. Somebody's car catching on fire, or a fuel hose falling off, your power steering stops, leaving you in the middle of nowhere, things like that, but that's definitely out of order. When something gets tight, you stop, you take it out, you assess, you remeasure it. Hell, you even call the customer, get them over, tell them what's happening. You know, even if a car has to stay for a bit, sure, even if it's urgent, you do what you got to do. You fix the thread up, or you put a shorter bolt in. Let's have a look at their bolt now. Alright, here we are. As we can see, it's been cut down. See the rust on there, it's been cut down before. Look at that, it's got thread locker in there. So probably when it got down to there, it got even harder to turn. That to apply more pressure. Who knows? But as I like to make fair assessment, that is it there.